Lady Ilara Voss was not the kind of woman people noticed right away. She was not loud. She did not walk into a room and demand that every head turn toward her. She dressed well, but not extravagantly. She spoke when she had something worth saying, and she stayed quiet when she did not. In a society that rewarded performance and sparkle above almost everything else, Ilara had decided long ago that she would simply be herself, and let the world make of that what it wished. She was 23 years old, the eldest daughter of Viscount Voss, a man everyone respected and no one offered to help. Her family had a name worth carrying but not enough money to carry it comfortably. That was the quiet truth of their household: fine furniture, modest meals, and the careful management of how much anyone outside their walls was allowed to know. When the London season began in the spring of 1847, Ilara arrived at it without the usual excitement. She had been through 2 seasons already. She understood what they were: a long, elaborate occasion for families to arrange their children into acceptable marriages. She did not hate the idea of marriage. She simply refused to perform desperation in pursuit of it. If she was going to spend her life with someone, she wanted it to be a real choice, not a transaction dressed up in silk and candlelight. There was one name, above all others, that the season revolved around that year. Edmund Ashworth, the Duke of Ravenstone. He was 30 years old, darkly handsome in the way that painters favor, and possessed of a title and fortune that made him the subject of more conversation than any living man in England probably deserved. He had attended 4 seasons and refused every candidate presented to him. People debated endlessly about what he wanted. Nobody seemed to have thought to ask him. Ilara had met him once, 2 years before, at a dinner hosted by mutual acquaintances. She had been seated near him. She had said something she thought was rather interesting about a book they had both apparently read. He had listened for a moment, then turned away mid-conversation to speak to someone more useful to him on his other side. He had not looked back. She had gone home that evening and spent approximately 10 minutes feeling the sharp sting of that dismissal. Then she folded it away somewhere private and got on with her life. She was good at that. By the time the season of 1847 opened, she had not thought about Edmund Ashworth in nearly a year. She was, she told herself, entirely over the brief and entirely one-sided embarrassment of having hoped he might find her interesting. She was wrong about that. But she would not discover it for some time. The Count of Whitfeld arrived in London on a Tuesday, 12 days into the season, with no particular announcement and no particular agenda. His name was Julian Mercer, he was 28 years old, and he had spent the last 3 years traveling between Paris, Vienna, and Rome for reasons that were never entirely explained but sounded very pleasant. He was introduced to Ilara entirely by accident, in the drawing room of a mutual acquaintance where she had arrived early and he had arrived on the wrong day for a different appointment. They were the only 2 people in the room for nearly 20 minutes before their hostess appeared, flustered and apologetic, to explain the confusion. In those 20 minutes, Ilara and Julian had argued about Napoleon, agreed about poetry, and discovered that they had both read the same obscure French novel that almost nobody in England had heard of. By the time their hostess arrived, they were deep in a conversation that neither of them wanted to stop. Julian began calling on her 2 days later. He brought the book she had mentioned wanting to find. He remembered, from a single passing comment, that she liked sweet peas better than roses, and he sent sweet peas. He listened to her the way very few people had ever listened to her, not waiting for his turn to speak, but genuinely paying attention, as though what she said mattered to him and he did not want to miss any of it. Ilara was careful. She was always careful. But she was also, for the first time in longer than she cared to admit, genuinely happy in someone's company. He listened to her the way you listen to someone when you are afraid of missing something important. She had not experienced that before. Edmund Ashworth, meanwhile, was doing what he always did at the start of a season, attending the necessary events, being polite to the necessary people, and feeling a quiet but persistent dissatisfaction with all of it. He had told his mother he would find a suitable match this year. He intended to keep that promise. He simply had not yet encountered anyone who made him want to. He first saw Ilara again at the Duchess of Cavendish's garden party, 3 weeks into the season. He did not immediately place her. He noticed her first because she was laughing, and her laughter was the real kind, the kind that arrives without warning and slightly undoes a person's composure in a way that is charming rather than undignified. She was standing beneath a pale yellow awning, and the men beside her had clearly said something very good, because she was still smiling even after the laughter had passed. The man beside her was Julian Mercer. Edmund watched for longer than he meant to. Something about the scene unsettled him in a way he could not name. The man was looking at the woman the way men look when they have already decided something. And the woman, who Edmund was now slowly remembering, with the specific discomfort of a man recognizing his own mistake, was looking back at him with the open expression of someone who felt entirely comfortable. Edmund had not made her feel comfortable 2 years ago. He had made her feel invisible. He arranged an introduction through Lady Pemberton. He was smooth about it. Nobody would have guessed it was deliberate. He presented himself to Elara with the easy confidence of a man who had never been refused anything in his life, and he prepared to be charming. Elara was polite to him. Perfectly, graciously, completely politely. She asked him 1 or 2 appropriate questions. She answered his questions with appropriate answers. She smiled at the right moments. And when Julian drifted back to her side a few minutes later, she greeted him with a warmth that was so natural and unguarded that the contrast with her politeness toward Edmund was impossible to miss, even if no one else at the party noticed it. Edmund noticed it. He left the garden party 40 minutes later feeling something he had not felt in years, rattled. He began to pay attention. This was new for him. Edmund Ashworth had spent most of his adult life waiting for the world to present him with things worth noticing. It had not occurred to him, seriously, to go looking. But now he went to events he would previously have declined. He positioned himself in rooms where she was likely to be. He listened to her when she spoke to others, and he was repeatedly struck by the same quality, a kind of quiet honesty in everything she said. She never performed. She never adjusted herself for her audience. She simply said what she thought, in clear and simple language, and let people do with it what they would. He watched Julian during this time as well, and this was the more uncomfortable education. Julian was doing everything right. He brought her things she had mentioned once in passing. He argued with her ideas instead of simply agreeing with them, which she clearly loved. He introduced her to people he thought she would like. He treated her, in other words, as a person worth investing in, which was so obvious a thing to do that Edmund could not understand why he had never thought to do it himself. The Duchess Marguerite, Edmund's mother, noticed her son's distraction at dinner one evening and said only, "The Voss girl is exceptional, Edmund." She always was. He said nothing. He refilled his wine. His mother watched him and said nothing further, which was, from her, a very specific kind of patience. The rumor arrived at Edmund's club on a Tuesday morning in October, carried by 3 different men in the space of an hour. The Count of Whitfeld was expected to offer for Lady Elara Voss before the end of the season. He had spoken to Lord Voss. Lord Voss had given a provisional agreement. The matter was, by all social calculation, nearly settled. Edmund read his newspaper for several minutes after hearing this. The words did not go in. He set it down. He stared at the fire. A man he had known for 20 years asked him if he was well. He said he was perfectly fine. He rode for 2 hours in the park before returning home to sit in his study and be honest with himself for the first time in a very long while. He had looked past her. 2 years ago, mid-sentence, without a second thought, because she had not seemed important enough to keep his attention. He had not even remembered doing it until she reminded him of it by being utterly indifferent to his attempts at charm. And now another man, a good man, by all accounts, a man who had paid attention from the start, was about to offer her a future, and she was about to accept it, and Edmund had no one to blame for any of this except the version of himself that had once decided she was not worth finishing a conversation with. He had spent his whole life waiting to want something. He had wanted her for weeks now. And it was entirely possible that he had already run out of time. He found her at a recital the following Thursday, and he tried again. This time he was not smooth. He was direct, and that directness cost him something visible, which she noticed immediately because she noticed everything. He told her that he owed her an apology for an evening 2 years ago. He did not dress it up or make it elegant. He simply said that he had been inattentive and thoughtless, and that he was ashamed of it, and that he understood if she had no interest in revisiting an acquaintance that had started so badly. She looked at him steadily for a moment. Then she said, "Why now?" He gave her the honest answer. Because he had not been paying attention before. Because he was paying attention now. Because something had shifted in him and he did not know how to shift it back, and he was no longer certain he wanted to. It was the most open he had been with another person in 10 years. She could see the effort it cost him. She was not a cruel woman, and she did not enjoy watching someone struggle. But she was also not a woman who forgot things, and she had not forgotten the particular loneliness of being talked past mid-sentence by someone whose opinion she had, foolishly, cared about. She excused herself after a moment. She returned to Julian's side. She did not look back at Edmund. But something in her expression, in that brief moment before she turned away, had shifted. Not much. Not enough to be certain about. But enough for a man who was now watching her very carefully to notice. Julian was not a man who missed things. He was warm and easy and the kind of person who put people at their ease, but underneath all of that was a sharp intelligence and a clear pair of eyes. He had been watching Edmund Ashworth watch Elara for 3 weeks. He knew what it looked like. He asked Elara directly, during a walk in the park on a quiet Thursday morning, whether there was something she wanted to tell him. He was not accusing her of anything. He was simply opening a door, the way he always did with her, and waiting to see if she would walk through it. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I do not know what I feel. I know what I was beginning to feel. I am less certain now." Julian walked beside her in silence for a moment. Then he told her that he would not ask for an answer before she was ready to give one. That she was not a problem to be solved on anyone else's schedule. That if she needed time, he had time to give. And that if she arrived, at the end of that time, at a different answer than the one he was hoping for, he would still consider knowing her one of the better things that had happened to him in London. He meant all of it. This was the most painful part, not that Julian was gracious, but that he was entirely sincere about it. The Marquis of Hale's autumn ball was the event that everyone had been moving toward without fully realizing it. 300 guests, the grandest house in the county, and the particular tension that gathers at the end of a season when all the decisions that have been avoided must finally be made. Elara arrived with her mother and Mrs. Dalton. She wore deep green, which suited her in a way that required no effort. Julian found her within 10 minutes and stood with her near the better-lit side of the ballroom. Edmund arrived later and took up a position that was not obviously close to her but was closer than anywhere else in the room. Lady Cornelia Fitch, who had pursued Edmund Ashworth for 3 seasons and was running out of patience with his indifference, said something within earshot of a small cluster of people that included Elara. It was the kind of remark that arrives wearing a smile. Something about modest families and the challenges of maintaining appearances above one's natural station. It was not a shout. It was worse than a shout. It was the quiet, deliberate cruelty of a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. The people nearby went still in that particular way that means everyone heard and no one wants to be the first to react. Edmund had been close enough to hear every word. He moved before he had consciously decided to. He crossed the floor, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the absolute certainty of a man who had made up his mind. He stopped in front of Elara. He did not look at Lady Cornelia. In a clear, calm voice that carried precisely as far as the situation required, he said, "Lady Elara, I believe this is our dance." There was no arrangement. Everyone present was aware there had been no arrangement. That was the entire point. Elara looked at him. There was a whole conversation in that look, a question, and an answer, and something older than both. She placed her hand in his. The orchestra, as though the universe had been mildly cooperative for once, began to play. She would not remember the steps afterward. She would remember only that he held her hand as though he intended to keep it, and danced with her as though no one else in the room existed. They went out to the balcony after the third dance, while the party continued loudly behind them. The night was cool and clear, and London glittered at a distance like something out of a storybook. Edmund told her, standing there in the dark with no audience and no strategy left, that she was the most genuine person he had met in a world built almost entirely on pretending. That her refusal to chase his approval, when most people in his life adjusted themselves constantly to earn it, was the thing that had finally made him understand how badly he had been looking at everything. That he had come to the season looking for a suitable match and found, instead, that he had already met her and thrown the opportunity away without a second thought. He told her he was not asking for a decision. He was asking only for a chance. A real one, this time, without the arrogance that had ruined the first. You had that chance 2 years ago, she said. I know, he said. I am asking for another one. I will not waste it. She did not answer him that night. He did not expect her to. She was not a woman who made important decisions under pressure, and he had learned, in the past several weeks, to respect that about her. She thought for 3 days. She walked in the garden. She talked to Mrs. Dalton, who said direct and useful things without softening them. She sat with her own feelings and took them seriously, which is harder than it sounds. She thought about Julian, who had been warm and kind and entirely genuine, and who had given her more consideration in a few weeks than most people had given her in years. She owed him honesty, and she went to him first. She told him that she cared for him genuinely, and that she was sorry, and that she believed he deserved someone whose whole heart he had without reservation or hesitation. He listened. He nodded. He said, quietly, that he had known for some time. He smiled at her, a real smile, not a wounded one, and they said goodbye with the particular warmth of two people who have been kind to each other and will think well of each other for the rest of their lives. Then she wrote to Edmund. She told him she would accept the chance he was asking for. But she listed what she expected, clearly and without apology. She would not be a convenience. She would not be noticed only when someone else was looking. If he wished to know her, it would be entirely and honestly, or not at all. Edmund read the letter twice. He read it a third time. He sat quietly for a moment. Then he wrote back, all of it, and completely. I would have it no other way. The weeks that followed were different from anything Edmund had done before. He did not court her with grand gestures or expensive gifts. He courted her with attention, which was the only thing she had ever actually wanted from anyone. He read the books she mentioned. He asked questions and listened to the full answers. He argued with her when he disagreed, and she argued back, and they were both privately pleased to discover that the other could hold their ground. His mother had tea with Alara one Tuesday morning and returned home to tell Edmund only, finally. You have managed not to ruin it. This was the closest thing to high praise she was likely to offer. He proposed in the garden of her family's house on a quiet morning in November, with no audience and no performance. He told her he loved her in the same plain, slightly uncomfortable way he had learned to say true things to her. She told him she believed him. She said yes. Lord Voss shook Edmund's hand with the relief of a man who had been holding his breath for some time. Lady Voss cried. Mrs. Dalton, upon hearing the news, said, well. He came around. It was, from her, a generous response. As for Julian Mercer, he left London for the continent at the close of the season, as he had always planned. Reports reached London the following spring that he had been seen in Paris, happy and very much in the company of someone who laughed at all the right moments and argued with everything he said. He was, by all accounts, entirely well. He had always said that Alara deserved someone whose whole attention she had, without distraction and without reserve. He had been right about that. He simply turned out not to be that person. He took this with the grace of a man who had always preferred honest endings to comfortable fictions. She had never wanted to be the most beautiful woman in the room. She had wanted to be the one that someone actually saw. In the end, she was both. Edmund Ashworth had spent 30 years of his life certain that he would recognize what he wanted when it arrived. He had been wrong. It had arrived quietly, sat near him at a dinner table, said something worth listening to, and waited to be heard. He had looked away. He spent the rest of his life making sure he never looked away again.